A bus driver's discovery, a tale of courage and compassion. Walter Harmon adjusted his rearview mirror with a practiced flick of his wrist as the rumbling school bus rolled down the suburban streets of Willow Glenn, Illinois. At 62, the retired mechanic had found an unexpected second career as a school bus driver, a job that gave his days structure and purpose after 35 years of fixing engines and transmissions. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the blue-gray seats. Walter glanced at his watch, 3:45 p.m., right on schedule for the afternoon drop-offs. Most of the students from Willow Glen Intermediate School chatted animatedly about weekend plans, upcoming tests, or the latest social media drama. The usual cacophony of adolescent life filled the bus. But as Walter checked his mirror again, his gaze landed on a girl sitting alone near the front. She sat just 3 seats back, in the row directly above the air vent, her face partially hidden by strands of brown hair. Her shoulders were hunched forward, and though she tried to hide it, Walter could see her hand occasionally rise to wipe away tears. This was the 3rd day in a row he'd noticed her crying, always in the same pattern, quiet and reserved when the bus was full, gradually letting her guard down as students departed at their stops. Walter frowned, concern etching deeper lines into his weathered face. He'd been driving this route long enough to recognize the signs of a troubled kid. Looking down at his clipboard, where he kept the student roster, he confirmed what he already knew: her name was Rory Carson, Class 9B. She'd only been enrolled at Willow Glen for 2 weeks. The first week, Walter hadn't thought much of her quiet demeanor. New students often kept to themselves until they found their footing. But this second week had shown a disturbing pattern, and today seemed particularly bad. 5th Street coming up, Walter called out as he slowed for the stop. 2 boys grabbed their backpacks and made their way to the front, thanking Walter as they stepped off the bus. He watched them walk toward their homes before closing the door and continuing his route. With each stop, the bus grew emptier, and Walter continued stealing glances at Rory through his mirror. There were only 5 students left now, and Rory's stop was the last on his route. As the bus emptied further, her silent tears became more evident. At one point, Walter noticed something peculiar as he navigated a turn. Rory suddenly slouched forward, her hand disappearing beneath the seat. Walter couldn't see clearly what she was doing. He needed to keep his eyes on the road, but it appeared she was examining the air vent under the seat. A metallic clang echoed through the now quiet bus. "Everything all right back there?" Walter called, concerned. Rory's head snapped up, her eyes wide with surprise. "Yes," she said quickly, her voice barely audible. "Sorry, I dropped my tissue." Walter nodded and returned his attention to the road, but something felt off. He drew a long, contemplative breath. Yesterday, he tried to strike up a conversation with the girl, asking about her classes and how she was settling in, but she'd offered only one-word responses before retreating into silence. After dropping off the remaining students, Walter finally approached Rory's stop, a modest 2-story house with faded blue siding at the end of Maple Drive. As he pulled the bus to a stop, Walter made a decision: he couldn't just ignore what he was seeing day after day. "Last stop," he announced, opening the door. Rory gathered her pink backpack and stood, her movements sluggish. As she passed Walter, he noticed her red-rimmed eyes and the dark circles beneath them. "Have a good evening, Rory," he said with a gentle smile. She nodded without making eye contact and stepped off the bus. To her visible surprise, Walter followed her, stepping down onto the sidewalk. "Why are you following me?" she asked, her voice tinged with alarm. Walter held up his hands in a placating gesture. "I can't help but notice you've been upset on the bus lately," he said. "It's happened several times now. I just wanted to make sure with your parents that everything's okay." Fear flashed across Rory's face, though she quickly tried to mask it. "No need for that," she insisted, her voice rising slightly. "It's nothing big. School's just been hard, and I miss my friends from my previous school." Walter studied her face, uncertain. His decades of life experience told him there was more to the story, but he didn't want to push too hard and scare her. I understand, he said, but sometimes it helps to. The front door of the house swung open suddenly, cutting him off. A man stepped out onto the porch, his expression impassive. Rory, he called sharply, come inside. Rory shot Walter a look that seemed almost pleading before rushing toward the house. Her footsteps hurried across the concrete walkway. The man's attention turned to Walter. Is there a problem? He asked, his tone neutral but somehow unwelcoming. Walter hesitated for a moment before deciding to approach. He walked up the path toward the porch, stopping a respectful distance away. No problem, sir, Walter said. I'm Walter Harmon, Rory's bus driver. I just wanted to check in because I've noticed she seems upset on the ride home lately. The man's expression didn't change. I'm Greg Whitmore, Rory's stepfather, he said. Her mother isn't home right now. Walter nodded. I just wanted to let you know that Rory's been crying on the bus. I was concerned something might be troubling her. Greg's face softened slightly, though it didn't reach his eyes. Her grandmother passed away recently, he explained. It's been hard on all of us, but especially on Rory. They were close. She'll get over it, hopefully. I'm very sorry to hear that, Walter said, feeling a twinge of relief that there was an explanation. Please accept my condolences. I didn't mean to intrude. Thanks, Greg said, already turning away. Have a good day. Before Walter could finish wishing them a good evening in return, the door closed with a decisive click. Walking back to his bus, Walter couldn't shake a nagging feeling of unease. The stepfather's explanation made sense, but something about his demeanor felt off. There was no trace of grief in his voice when he mentioned the grandmother's death, and he had seemed awfully quick to dismiss Walter. Maybe I'm overthinking it, Walter muttered to himself as he climbed back into the driver's seat. Man could just be busy or private. Still, as he started the engine and pulled away from the curb, the image of Rory's pleading look stayed with him. Walter drove the bus back to the station, navigating the familiar streets on autopilot while his mind remained preoccupied with Rory. The afternoon sun was beginning to descend, casting long shadows across the neighborhood as he pulled into the school bus depot. After parking in his designated spot, Walter began his end-of-day routine. He walked the length of the bus, checking each seat for forgotten items and collecting the inevitable assortment of trash, crumpled homework assignments, empty chip bags, and half-finished water bottles. He placed each item into the garbage bag he always kept on hand, moving methodically from the back of the bus toward the front. When he reached the front seats, Walter paused. This was where Rory had been sitting, right above the air vent. He recalled the clang he'd heard and her hurried explanation about dropping a tissue. Looking at the seat now, he realized he hadn't seen her with any tissues when she left the bus. Maybe she'd put it in her pocket, but Walter's instincts told him to investigate further. He crouched down, his knees protesting with a dull ache. The floor around the seat appeared clean, no tissues or obvious debris. Walter's attention turned to the air vent itself. It was securely fastened to the floor, but as he examined it more closely, he noticed a small gap between the vent and the seat base. Let's see what we have here, he murmured, reaching his fingers into the narrow space. His fingertips brushed against something smooth and unfamiliar. With some effort, Walter managed to extract a small plastic package. When he pulled it out into the light, his breath caught in his throat. It was a blister pack of pink pills, partially used. Walter turned it over in his hand, studying the unfamiliar medication. The brand name was printed on the back, along with dosage information. What in the world? Walter pulled out his phone and quickly searched for the drug name online. His eyes widened as he read the search results. They were pregnancy prevention pills, birth control. Walter sat heavily in the driver's seat, staring at the package in his hand. A 14 or 15-year-old girl was hiding birth control pills under her seat on the school bus. Combined with her crying and withdrawn behavior, it painted a concerning picture. Walter took several photos of the pills with his phone, carefully documenting what he'd found and where. Then he tucked the pills into his waist bag, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. This wasn't something he could ignore. With slightly trembling fingers, Walter located the principal's contact information in his phone and attached the photos to a message. Found these hidden under a seat on my bus today. They belong to a student. Please advise on next steps. After sending the message, Walter waited a moment, but no immediate response came. Growing increasingly anxious, he decided to call the principal directly. After 3 rings, a curt voice answered, "This is Principal Daniels." "Hello, sir, this is Walter Harmon, bus driver for Route 14. The principal's sigh was audible through the phone. "Mr. Harmon, I'm currently in a meeting with the school board. Is this urgent?" "I believe it is, sir. I just sent you some photos." "I haven't had a chance to check my messages," Principal Daniels cut in, his voice strained with impatience. "How important could it be that it can't wait until after my meeting?" Walter hesitated, unsure how much to say over the phone. "I found something concerning on the bus that belongs to one of your students. I think you should take a look as soon as possible." "I'll look at whatever you sent after my meeting," the principal responded, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. "I don't like to be disturbed unless there's a genuine emergency." The call ended abruptly, leaving Walter staring at his phone in frustration. He had expected more urgency from the principal, especially given the nature of his discovery. "Guess I'll have to handle this myself for now," Walter muttered, pocketing his phone and gathering his belongings. Walter returned the bus key at the station office, clocked out, and headed to the parking lot where his old Buick waited. The car had seen better days, the blue paint was fading, and there was a persistent rattle in the engine, but it had been with him for 15 years and still ran reliably enough. As he pulled out of the station, Walter's mind churned with indecision. He knew his route home would take him right past Rory's house. Part of him felt compelled to stop there again, to show the stepfather what he'd found and ensure the girl was safe. But the memory of Greg Whitmore's dismissive attitude gave him pause. Maybe he doesn't even know, Walter reasoned aloud as he drove. Could be the girls taking them in secret. He passed the turnoff to Maple Drive, where Rory's house stood, then slowed his car, conscience nagging at him. After a moment's hesitation, he made a U-turn at the next intersection and headed back. Pulling up in front of the modest blue house, Walter took a deep breath to steady his nerves. He wasn't looking forward to another interaction with Greg Whitmore, but his concern for Rory outweighed his discomfort. He approached the door and knocked firmly. No response came. He waited a reasonable interval before knocking again, this time a bit louder. Still nothing. Walter peered through the front window. The house was dark inside, with no signs of movement or life. It appeared no one was home, despite it being less than an hour since he dropped Rory off. Returning to his car, Walter pulled out the emergency contact list he kept for all the students on his route. He located Rory's information and found the contact number listed under Greg Whitmore's name. He dialed the number, but after several rings, it went to voicemail. Strange, Walter muttered, hanging up without leaving a message. Where could they have gone so quickly? With a sigh, he started his car again and continued his journey home. He had done what he could for now. Perhaps the principal would call him back soon, or he could try contacting Rory's family again later. Walter had driven only a few miles when he spotted a familiar figure emerging from the pharmacy on Cedar Street. It was Rory, walking alone. She looked miserable, one arm wrapped around her stomach as if in pain. Without thinking twice, Walter pulled over to the curb and got out of his car. "Rory," he called softly, not wanting to startle her. The girl looked up, surprise and weariness crossing her face when she recognized him. She stopped walking but maintained her distance. "Are you all right?" Walter asked, noticing her pallid complexion. "You look like you're in pain." "I'm fine," she said flatly, though her posture suggested otherwise. Walter glanced around. "Where's your stepfather? Did he drop you off here?" "That's not your business," Rory replied, her voice hardening. "What do you want from me?" Walter raised his hands in a non-threatening gesture. "I'm just concerned about you, that's all. I've been driving school buses for years, and I can tell when a student is having a tough time." Rory shifted uncomfortably, clutching her stomach tighter. "I said I'm fine. Please leave me alone." Before Walter could respond, a middle-aged couple walking past slowed their pace, looking between him and Rory with concern. "Everything okay here?" the man asked, directing the question to Rory. The girl hesitated, then said in a quiet voice, "He scares me." The couple immediately stepped between Walter and Rory, their posture protective. "Sir, I think you should leave," the woman said firmly. Walter felt his face flush with embarrassment and frustration. "I'm her school bus driver. I was just checking if she needed help." "She clearly doesn't want your help," the man replied. "Move along before we call the police." Seeing no way to explain himself without making the situation worse, Walter reluctantly returned to his car. As he pulled away from the curb, he glanced in his rearview mirror and saw that the couple had already continued walking, leaving Rory alone once again. He slowed his car, watching as Rory suddenly bent over a nearby garbage bin and retched violently. "Something is very wrong here," Walter muttered, feeling increasingly troubled. His first instinct was to call the police, but what would he tell them? That a girl said she was scared of him? That he found birth control pills and now she was throwing up? He had no concrete evidence of any immediate danger, and involving the authorities without talking to the parents first could create unnecessary problems. Walter decided to keep an eye on Rory from a distance. He parked his car across the street, feeling uncomfortable about essentially stalking a young girl but convinced that his intentions were pure. If he saw anything truly alarming, he would intervene. From his vantage point, Walter watched as Rory composed herself and walked unsteadily toward a small liquor store at the end of the block. She disappeared inside, and Walter waited, occasionally checking his phone for any response from the principal. After about 10 minutes, movement at the store caught Walter's attention. Rory emerged, but she wasn't alone. Greg Whitmore followed her out, turning to lock the door behind him and flipping the sign from "open" to "closed." Walter realized that Greg must own or work at the liquor store, explaining why he hadn't been home earlier. The two walked to a sedan parked nearby. Through his car window, Walter observed Greg hand something to Rory to drink. From this distance, he couldn't tell if it was alcohol or something innocent like water or soda. The girl took it without enthusiasm, keeping her gaze downward. Walter's finger hovered over the emergency call button on his phone. Should he call the police? What if he was overreacting, and there was a perfectly innocent explanation for everything he'd seen? But what if he wasn't, and Rory was in real danger? As he debated with himself, Greg's car pulled away from the curb. Making a split-second decision, Walter started his engine. He would follow them, just to make sure Rory was safe, and meanwhile keep trying to reach someone in authority who could help. As Walter followed Greg's sedan at a discreet distance, he racked his brain for other ways to help Rory. The principal hadn't responded to his message, but perhaps there was someone else at the school he could contact. With one eye on the road ahead, Walter scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for Rory's homeroom teacher, Miss Margaret. He had met her at the beginning of the school year during the staff orientation day and remembered her as a caring, attentive educator. He put the phone on speaker and placed it in the cup holder as it rang. "Hello," a female voice answered after the third ring. "Miss Margaret, this is Walter Harmon, the driver for bus route 14. "Yes, Mr. Harmon, is everything all right?" Her voice held a note of surprise at receiving a call from a bus driver. "I'm calling about one of your students, Rory Carson," Walter explained, keeping his voice low even though there was no way Greg or Rory could hear him from the other car. "Have you noticed anything unusual about her behavior lately?" There was a pause before Miss Margaret responded, her tone more serious. "Actually, yes. She's very quiet, never approaches any of the other students for friendship, and she's been excusing herself to the restroom multiple times during class." Walter nodded to himself, another piece of the puzzle falling into place. Anything else? Today, she seemed particularly unwell, Miss Margaret continued. I suggested she go to the clinic, but apparently she went to the theater room instead and fell asleep. One of the drama teachers found her there later. Did you report this to Principal Daniels? Walter asked, carefully maintaining his distance from Greg's car as they turned onto the highway. Yes, but he dismissed it as typical new student rebellion. Said he'd deal with her tomorrow after his meeting with the school board. Miss Margaret paused. Why are you asking about this, Mr. Harmon? Has something happened on your bus? Walter took a deep breath. I found something under Rory's seat today. He briefly pulled over to send Miss Margaret the same photos he'd sent to the principal. I'm sending you pictures now. He heard the soft ping of a received message, then silence as Miss Margaret presumably examined the images. These are birth control pills, she finally said, her voice hushed with concern. Where exactly did you find these? Hidden under the seat where Rory always sits, Walter confirmed. Based on what I've observed and what you've just told me, I'm very worried about her. This is serious, Miss Margaret agreed. The parents need to know about this immediately. I've been trying to reach them, Walter explained, describing his earlier visit to their home and his current situation following Greg's car. I'm considering calling the police, but I'm not sure if that's the right move yet. Please don't call the police just yet, Miss Margaret urged. Principal Daniels would be furious if we involved law enforcement without his approval. We should try to handle this internally first. I'll see if I can find the mother's contact information in our system. Walter noticed that Greg's car was now heading toward the outskirts of town, away from residential areas. They're driving to the edge of town now, he reported. I'm going to stay with them and make sure Rory's safe. Be careful, Walter, Miss Margaret cautioned. Keep me updated, and I'll try to reach the mother. After ending the call, Walter focused on maintaining a safe following distance as Greg's sedan continued down the highway. After about 45 minutes of driving, they turned off toward a rural park, a spacious area with walking trails, picnic grounds, and a small lake. It was approaching 4:30 p.m., and while the park wasn't crowded, there were still a few families enjoying the late afternoon sunshine. Greg parked in the lot near the entrance, and Walter found a spot several rows away where he could observe without being obvious. He watched as Greg and Rory got out of the car and walked toward the picnic area. Greg carried a small cooler, while Rory trailed behind him, her posture suggesting reluctance. Walter waited until they were settled before cautiously exiting his own vehicle and following on foot, maintaining his distance but keeping them in sight. A sense of dread pooled in Walter's stomach, but he hoped it was just a regular family picnic. But why did the girl look so miserable if this was just an innocent family outing? Walter made his way through the park, staying on the paths and trying to appear like any other visitor enjoying the late afternoon sunshine. He kept Greg and Rory in his peripheral vision, not wanting to draw attention to himself by staring directly at them. The stepfather had set up a picnic blanket on the grass, arranging items from the cooler he'd brought. Walter observed as Greg opened a bottle of beer for himself and handed Rory what appeared to be a soft drink in a can. Relief washed over Walter at the sight. At least Greg wasn't giving alcohol to a minor, as he had feared earlier. From his vantage point on a nearby bench, Walter watched their interaction. What might have looked like a normal family picnic to casual observers struck him as distinctly uncomfortable. Rory sat stiffly at the edge of the blanket, barely touching her drink. She kept her gaze fixed on the ground, responding to Greg's occasional comments with minimal movement. At one point, Greg reached over and placed his hands on Rory's shoulders in what appeared to be a joking massage. The girl immediately tensed and shoved his hands away with surprising force. Greg laughed it off, but Walter could see the brief flash of anger in his expression. Maybe I am overreacting, Walter murmured to himself, doubt creeping in. Perhaps Rory really was just grieving her grandmother's death, as Greg had claimed. Perhaps the birth control pills were related to a relationship with a boy her own age, troubling for someone so young, but not necessarily sinister. Walter was considering leaving and allowing the principal to handle the situation tomorrow when he noticed three men approaching Greg and Rory's picnic spot. They were in their 30s or 40s, casually dressed but with an intensity in their manner that immediately put Walter on alert. Greg stood to greet them, slapping one on the back and laughing as if they were old friends. After a brief conversation that Walter couldn't hear from his position, Greg gestured for Rory to get up. The five of them, Greg, Rory, and the three men, began walking away from the picnic area toward a plain white building that appeared to be a maintenance shed for the park. Walter's unease returned tenfold as he watched one of the men produce a key and unlock the door. There was no legitimate reason Walter could imagine for four grown men to take a teenage girl into a locked shed in a secluded part of the park. His hands shaking slightly, Walter pulled out his phone and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher answered promptly. I need to report a suspicious situation involving a minor, Walter said, keeping his voice low as he moved closer to the shed. I'm at Lakeside Park, near the maintenance buildings on the east side. A teenage girl has been taken into a locked shed by four adult men. I believe she may be in danger. Sir, are you certain the girl is in danger? Do you know her? Yes, I'm her school bus driver. I've been concerned about her behavior and discovered she's been hiding birth control pills on my bus. Now her stepfather has brought her to this remote location to meet with these men. Walter's voice grew more urgent. Please send someone quickly. Something is very wrong here. We're dispatching officers to your location now, the dispatcher assured him. They should be there in approximately 10 minutes. Can you safely remain on the line and keep the building in sight without approaching? Yes, I can do that, Walter confirmed, finding a position behind a cluster of trees where he could observe the shed without being easily spotted. Can you describe the individuals involved? The dispatcher asked. Walter provided descriptions of Greg, Rory, and the three men as best he could, including details about their clothing and the vehicles in the parking lot. As he spoke, he crept closer to the shed, his concern for Rory overriding his normal caution. The building had small, dusty windows set high in the walls. Walter approached one of them, wiping away grime with his sleeve to peer inside. The interior was dimly lit, but he could make out the figures of the four men gathered around Rory. The girl was backed against a wall, her face streaked with tears. Do as you're told, Rory, Walter heard Greg say, his voice muffled but audible through the thin walls. You know what happens if you don't cooperate. Please don't make me, Rory pleaded, her voice breaking. I can't do this. Your mother will hate you for this, Greg hissed, his voice dropping lower. When she finds out you're pregnant, she's going to have a new baby. She'll forget you even exist. Walter's blood ran cold at the words. He relayed what he was hearing to the 911 dispatcher, his voice tight with anger. The police are 3 minutes out, the dispatcher informed him. Please do not attempt to intervene yourself. Walter was about to respond when he felt a hand on his shoulder. He startled, nearly dropping his phone, as he turned to find two men in running clothes standing behind him. What are you doing peering in there, man? One of them asked, his expression suspicious. Walter hastily explained the situation, keeping his voice low. There's a girl in there who needs help. I've called the police, they're on their way. The two joggers exchanged glances, then peered through the window themselves. Their expressions hardened as they took in the scene inside. We can't just wait out here, the taller of the two said, his jaw set with determination. They could be hurting her right now. The police said to wait, Walter began, but was cut off by a sudden silence from inside the shed. The men had apparently heard something and gone quiet. Making a split-second decision, the joggers approached the door and pounded on it forcefully. Hey, open up in there, one of them shouted. Complete silence fell, stretching for several seconds. Then, faintly, they heard Rory's voice cry out, help. Please help me. As if on cue, police sirens wailed in the distance, rapidly growing louder. Two patrol cars pulled into the park, lights flashing, and 4 officers quickly approached the scene, drawing their weapons. "Police! Everyone inside, come out with your hands visible," one officer commanded through the door. When no immediate response came, the officers exchanged quick words before one returned to the patrol car and retrieved a heavy tool. With practiced efficiency, they breached the door, the wood splintering around the lock. "Hands up, on your knees, now," the officers shouted as they entered the shed. 3 of the men immediately complied, dropping to their knees with their hands raised. But Greg remained standing near Rory, who was huddled on the floor. "Step away from the girl," an officer ordered, his weapon trained on Greg. Greg's face contorted with defiance. "This is all a misunderstanding," he insisted, not moving from his position over Rory. "Last warning," the officer said firmly. "Step away now, or we will use force." With deliberate slowness, Greg reached for a bottle of alcohol on a nearby shelf. "You don't understand," he began, his hand closing around the neck of the bottle. "Drop it," several officers shouted in unison. "Drop it now, or we will shoot." For a tense moment, it seemed Greg might try something desperate. Then, with a curse, he let the bottle fall back onto the shelf and raised his hands. "On your knees," the officer directed again. Finally, Greg complied, sinking to his knees. Officers moved in quickly to secure him with handcuffs. As they led the men out one by one, Greg's gaze locked on Walter standing outside, his face twisted with rage. With a sudden burst of strength, he lunged toward Walter, nearly breaking free from the officer's grip. "You! This is your fault!" he shouted, attempting to headbutt Walter before the officers restrained him fully. Walter stepped back, shock coursing through him at the man's violence. He watched as the officers secured Greg in one of the patrol cars, the man still hurling obscenities through the window. Inside the shed, Rory remained huddled on the floor, her arms wrapped protectively around herself as an officer gently approached her. Within 20 minutes of the arrests, the quiet park had transformed into a flurry of official activity. 2 additional police cars had arrived, along with an ambulance and a vehicle carrying a social worker. Yellow crime scene tape cordoned off the area around the shed, and officers were taking statements from Walter and the 2 joggers who had helped intervene. The paramedics had guided Rory to sit at the back of the ambulance, where they were checking her vital signs and offering her a blanket despite the mild evening temperature. A female social worker sat beside her, speaking in gentle tones that Walter couldn't hear from where he stood. Walter watched as the 2 joggers finished giving their statements. They nodded to him as they departed, one giving him a respectful thumbs up. Walter felt profound gratitude for their intervention, strangers who had chosen to get involved when they could have simply walked away. As the police finished recording his own statement, Walter saw Rory glance in his direction. Her eyes, still red from crying, held a new expression, tentative gratitude. She said something to the social worker, who nodded and motioned for Walter to approach. Walter walked over slowly, not wanting to overwhelm the girl after all she had been through. "Thank you," Rory said quietly as he reached the ambulance, her voice hoarse from crying. Walter nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "I'm just glad you're safe now." He crouched down to be at her eye level, then reached into his waist bag and carefully withdrew the pills he had found earlier. He showed them to Rory and the officials present. "Rory. System, here is the continuation of the rewritten script in American English, maintaining every single word from the original document while ensuring a natural storytelling style suitable for American audiences. The narrative remains unchanged, with adjustments made only to align phrasing, terminology, and tone with American English conventions, e.g., replacing mum with mom. The story continues in a proper storytelling format, preserving the emotional weight and suspenseful pacing of the original. Underscore 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 underscore. He said gently, "I found these under your seat on the bus. I think you need to explain to these people about these pills, if you were taking them because of what your stepfather was doing to you." Rory's face crumpled at the sight of the pills, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. She looked between Walter, the social worker, and the female police officer who had joined them. "It's okay, Rory," the social worker assured her. "You're not in trouble. We just need to understand what's been happening so we can help you." Rory took a shuddering breath and began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "My mom divorced my real dad last year," she began. "He got in trouble with the police for fraud or something. Then Mom met Greg, and she got pregnant pretty quickly." Rory paused, rubbing her arms as if cold despite the blanket. "Mom's been gone for 2 weeks now. She's staying at my grandmother's house because it's our family tradition. She wanted to give birth there and stay for a month to take care of the baby." The social worker made notes as Rory spoke, occasionally nodding encouragingly. "When did Greg start hurting you?" the police officer asked gently. Rory's gaze dropped to her hands. "A month ago," she whispered. "He started coming into my room at night when I was sleeping. I was so scared, but he told me if I told anyone, especially my mom, he would kill us and the baby too." Her voice broke. "So I just kept quiet all the time." "And the pills?" Walter prompted softly, gesturing to the birth control package. "I started feeling sick in the mornings," Rory continued. "One of the girls at school noticed and told me I should get pregnancy prevention pills. I didn't really understand, but she said they would help me not get pregnant, so I bought them with money I had saved." The paramedic exchanged glances with the social worker, both looking concerned. "Rory," the paramedic said carefully, "if you were already feeling sick, like morning sickness, then prevention pills wouldn't help. They're meant to prevent pregnancy before it happens, not end one that's already begun." Rory looked up, confusion and fear in her eyes. "I didn't know that. I thought they would stop the sickness. Someone found them in my backpack at school," she continued, "so I started hiding them under the seat on the bus where I always sit." The police officer placed a gentle hand on Rory's shoulder. "Rory, we're going to need to contact your mother and your school, and we'll need to have a doctor examine you to determine if you're pregnant." "No, please," Rory begged, fresh panic in her voice. "I don't want this. I can't be pregnant. My mom will hate me." "Your mother won't hate you," the social worker assured her. "None of this is your fault, Rory. Your stepfather is the one who did something terrible, not you. We need to talk to your mother," the officer said firmly but kindly. "This isn't something we can keep from her." Rory's shoulders slumped in defeat as she nodded, tears streaming silently down her face. Walter watched the interaction with a heavy heart. He had seen troubled kids before in his years as a bus driver, but nothing like this. He cleared his throat, drawing the attention of the officials. "If it's all right," he said, "I'd like to accompany Rory to the hospital. I want to make sure she's not alone while waiting for her mother." The social worker considered this for a moment, then nodded. "That would be fine, Mr. Harmon. We'll need to take your statement at the hospital as well." One of the police officers approached their group. "The principal has been contacted," he informed them. "He says he'll meet us at the hospital." Walter nodded, remembering the message he had sent earlier that had gone unanswered. Her homeroom teacher, Miss Margaret, also knows about the situation. "I called her earlier when I became concerned." "We'll contact her as well," the officer confirmed. "Now, let's get Rory to the hospital for proper care." The emergency room of Willow Glenn Memorial Hospital buzzed with its usual controlled chaos as Walter sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, waiting for news. After their arrival, Rory had been whisked away for examination, leaving Walter to give his statement to the police in a small conference room down the hall. He checked his watch, nearly 2 hours had passed since they'd arrived at the hospital. The social worker, a compassionate woman named Ms. Rivera, occasionally updated him on what was happening, but the details were necessarily limited due to privacy concerns. As Walter sipped a cup of mediocre coffee from the vending machine, Ms. Rivera approached him again. "Mr. Harmon," she said, taking a seat beside him, "Rory is asking for you. They finished the initial examination, and she's been moved to a private room. If you'd like to see her, I can take you there now." Walter stood immediately. "Yes, please." Ms. Rivera led him through a maze of corridors to a small room where Rory sat on the edge of a hospital bed. She looked impossibly small in the oversized hospital gown, her eyes red-rimmed but dry for the moment. A female doctor was making notes on a tablet near the window. "Walter?" Rory said, a hint of relief in her voice. "How are you doing, kiddo?" he asked gently, taking a seat in the chair beside her bed. Before she could answer, the doctor spoke up. "Mr. Harmon, I'm Dr. Chen. I understand you're the one who initially noticed something was wrong." Walter nodded. "I'm Rory's bus driver. I noticed her crying on the bus every day and then found those pills." Dr. Chen's expression was grave. "I've completed my examination of Rory, and I've confirmed that she is indeed pregnant, currently in the first week of pregnancy." Walter closed his eyes briefly, the confirmation of his worst fears hitting him like a physical blow. When he opened them again, he saw tears silently streaming down Rory's face. A commotion in the hallway interrupted the moment. A woman's voice, high with panic, could be heard demanding information from the hospital staff. Seconds later, the door burst open, and two women rushed in, one in her late 30s and another perhaps 20 years older. "Rory," the younger woman cried, rushing to the bed and gathering the girl in her arms. "Oh my God, baby, what happened?" "The police called and said," she broke off, unable to finish the sentence as she held her daughter tightly. "Mom!" Rory sobbed, clinging to her mother. The older woman, presumably Rory's grandmother, stood at the foot of the bed, her face a mask of shock and fury. "Where is he?" she demanded of no one in particular. "Where is that monster? I'll kill him myself." Dr. Chen stepped forward. "Mrs. Carson, Mrs. Carson's mother, I'm Dr. Chen. I've been caring for Rory since she arrived. Perhaps we could speak privately about her condition." Rory's mother pulled back slightly, her face pale. "Condition? What's wrong with my daughter?" Dr. Chen glanced at Rory, then back to her mother. "Mrs. Carson, I'm afraid Rory is pregnant." The words landed like a bomb in the small room. Rory's mother swayed on her feet, her face draining of what little color remained. The grandmother rushed forward to support her, helping her into a chair where she sat heavily, her hands trembling as she covered her mouth. "No," she whispered. "No, that can't be. She's just a child." "I'm so sorry, Mom," Rory said, her voice breaking. "I tried to stop him, but—" "This is not your fault," her mother interrupted fiercely, reaching for her hand. "None of this is your fault, do you understand me? It's Greg, that, words failed her as she dissolved into tears, her body shaking with sobs. The grandmother turned to Dr. Chen, her expression hard. "What are the options here? She's 14 years old. She cannot have a baby." Dr. Chen nodded solemnly. "I was about to discuss this with you. There are health risks associated with pregnancy at Rory's age. Additionally, given the circumstances, there are options available for termination, if that's what Rory and you decide is best. Illinois has some of the most progressive abortion laws in the country," Ms. Rivera added gently. "If that's the path you choose, there would be no legal barriers." Walter, feeling like an intruder on this deeply personal family moment, stood quietly. "I should give you all some privacy," he said, moving toward the door. "Wait," Rory called out. "Please don't go yet." Her mother turned, seeming to notice Walter for the first time. "Who are you?" "This is Walter Harmon, Mrs. Carson," Ms. Rivera explained. "He's Rory's school bus driver. He's the one who noticed something was wrong and ultimately alerted the authorities." The grandmother approached Walter, tears in her eyes. You saved our girl, she said, gripping his hand fiercely. Thank you, thank you. Walter nodded, uncomfortable with the praise. I just did what anyone should do. Rory's mother struggled to her feet and embraced Walter unexpectedly. Thank you, she whispered before pulling away, wiping her tears. A knock at the door preceded the entrance of a police officer. Mr. Harmon, could I speak with you for a moment? Walter nodded and followed the officer into the hallway, leaving the family to their private discussion with the doctor and social worker. I wanted to update you on the situation, the officer said once they were alone in a quiet corner. Greg Whitmore is in custody and has been charged with multiple serious offenses. He's not talking, but the 3 men we arrested with him are cooperating in exchange for reduced charges. What have they told you? Walter asked. According to their statements, Whitmore has a history of predatory behavior. He specifically targeted single mothers with daughters. The officer's expression hardened. He was jealous of Rory because she was from the first marriage. He took advantage of her and wanted to break her spirit so that her mother would reject her and focus solely on him and his upcoming child. Walter felt sick at the calculated cruelty. Will he be able to get out on bail? The officer shook his head. Not likely. With the evidence we have and the testimony of the other men, he's facing serious jail time, and we're investigating whether he has a pattern of this behavior with other victims. Walter nodded, relieved that the man would face justice. What about the principal and Ms. Margaret? I contacted both of them earlier today. They're both at the police station giving statements, the officer confirmed. We're trying to determine if there was any negligence on the part of the school in not noticing or addressing signs of abuse. Walter let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Good. That's good. We'll need you to testify if this goes to trial, the officer added, but that's down the road. For now, you should go home and rest. You've done more than enough today. Walter nodded, suddenly aware of the bone-deep exhaustion that had settled over him. I will, he promised. Walter exited the room where he had given his statement to the police, the exhaustion of the day finally settling into his bones. As he walked down the corridor, he noticed a woman sitting alone in the waiting area, her eyes red from crying, one hand resting protectively on her heavily pregnant belly. She looked up as Walter approached, and recognition flashed across her face. She stood with some effort, extending her hand. Mr. Harmon, I'm Laura Carson, Roar System. Here is the continuation and completion of the rewritten script in American English, maintaining every single word from the original document while ensuring a natural storytelling style suitable for American audiences. The narrative remains unchanged, with adjustments made only to align phrasing, terminology, and tone with American English conventions, e.g. replacing mum with mom. The story continues in a proper storytelling format, preserving the emotional weight and suspenseful pacing of the original. Underscore 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 underscore. Wise mother. Her voice was soft but steady. I didn't get to properly thank you earlier for what you did for my daughter. Walter shook her hand gently. Please, call me Walter, and there's no need for thanks. How is Rory doing? Laura gestured to the empty seat beside her, and Walter sat down. She sank back into her chair with a tired sigh. The doctor confirmed that she is indeed pregnant, now in the first week. Laura's voice caught slightly. They've explained the options to us. She twisted her hands in her lap. It's such an impossible situation, my daughter carrying my husband's child while I'm 8 months pregnant with his child as well. Walter remained silent, understanding there was nothing he could say to ease such an unimaginable burden. I never suspected, Laura continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought leaving her with Greg while I stayed at my mother's house to prepare for the baby was the right thing to do. Our family has this tradition. She trailed off, shaking her head. How could I have been so blind? You couldn't have known, Walter said gently. Men like Greg are expert manipulators. They hide their true nature. Laura nodded, though she didn't seem convinced. She started to stand, one hand bracing against the arm of the chair. I should get back to Rory. We still have so much to discuss about what happens next. As she rose to her feet, Eleanor, Rory's grandmother, approached from the hallway. Her face was drawn, her eyes red from crying, but she carried herself with rigid dignity. Laura, Rory is asking for you, she said, then turned to Walter. Mr. Harmon, I don't believe we've been properly introduced. I'm Eleanor Parker, Rory's grandmother. Walter stood and shook her hand. It's good to meet you, Mrs. Parker, though I wish it were under better circumstances. Suddenly, Laura gasped sharply, doubling over, her face contorted in pain as she clutched her abdomen. Laura. Eleanor rushed to her daughter's side. What's wrong? I think, Laura managed between gritted teeth, the baby's coming. Walter immediately called for help, and within moments, medical staff converged on them. Laura's water had broken, and contractions were coming rapidly. She's only 38 weeks, Eleanor told the doctor, her voice trembling. The baby wasn't due for another 2 weeks. The stress likely triggered early labor, the doctor explained as they helped Laura onto a wheelchair. We need to get her to the maternity ward immediately. As they began to wheel her away, Laura reached out and grasped Walter's wrist. Please, she gasped through another contraction, stay with Rory. Don't leave her alone. Walter nodded. I promise. Eleanor looked torn, glancing between her daughter being wheeled away and the direction of Rory's room. Rory shouldn't be alone right now, but Laura needs me too. Go with your daughter, Walter assured her. I'll stay with Rory until you can return. Eleanor hesitated only briefly before nodding. Thank you. I'll come back as soon as I can. As Eleanor hurried after the medical team transporting her daughter, Walter cautiously entered Rory's room. The girl sat on the edge of her bed, her face a mask of fear and confusion. Is my mom going to be okay? She asked as soon as she saw Walter. Your mom is strong, Walter reassured her, taking a seat in the chair beside her bed. The doctors are taking good care of her. Rory nodded, though she didn't look convinced. She got so upset when we were talking about what to do. Her hand unconsciously went to her stomach. Grandma was saying I should keep it, that we could say it was someone else's, a boy from school or something. Walter kept his expression neutral, though inwardly he was troubled by the suggestion. What did your mom say? She got really angry. Said she wouldn't let me sacrifice my life or carry that reminder forever. Rory's voice dropped to a whisper. They sat in silence for a moment before Rory spoke again, her voice so quiet Walter had to lean forward to hear her. I heard my grandma talking to a nurse. She said the new baby will come soon, and my mom wouldn't have more time for her and will love me less, that the nurse should just, Walter turned back to Rory, choosing his words carefully. Rory, I want to tell you something important, he said. I have 5 children of my own. Each one is different, each one is special in their own way, and not once, not for a single moment, did loving one of them mean I had less love for the others. Rory looked up at him, her eyes wide. Love doesn't work that way, Walter continued. It's not like a pie where each person gets a smaller slice when someone new comes along. It's more like, he searched for the right metaphor, like a candle lighting another candle. The first flame doesn't get smaller, instead, there's just more light. You really believe that? Rory asked, her voice small. I know it, Walter affirmed. Your mother loves you, Rory. A new baby won't change that, and whatever decision you make about your own situation, that won't change her love for you either. Rory was quiet for a long time, considering his words. Finally, she looked up at him with the ghost of a smile. Thank you for finding those pills, Walter, and for following us today. I was so scared. I couldn't just look away when I knew something was wrong, Walter said simply. That's not who I am. As they sat together, waiting for news of Laura and the baby, Walter reflected on the events that had brought him here. A simple observation, a moment of concern, a decision to act rather than ignore. Small choices that had changed the course of a young girl's life. He didn't know what decisions Rory and her family would ultimately make or how the healing process would unfold in the days and weeks to come. But he knew that by choosing to pay attention, by refusing to look away from a child in distress, he had made a difference. And in the end, perhaps that was all any of us could hope to do, to notice when someone needs help and to find the courage to act.